Commander Ethan Voss had mapped 17 star systems and survived 3 deep space emergencies, but nothing in his career had prepared him for the planet of Valoris 4. His mission was routine: land, survey, document, return. No contact protocol had been triggered because the satellite scans showed only primitive settlements, low electromagnetic signatures, no spacefaring capability. What the satellites had failed to capture was how utterly, breathtakingly beautiful it all was. He stepped out of his landing pod into a violet-tinged morning, the air sweet with something that reminded him of jasmine and rain. Twin moons still hung low in the dawning sky, one pale silver and the other a faint, dusty rose. The landscape stretched out like an artist's dream, bioluminescent flowers that pulsed softly even in daylight, trees with silver bark and leaves that chimed like glass in the wind. He had walked barely 20 minutes into the forest when he rounded a curve in the narrow path and collided, hard, with something small and warm. Oh, he stumbled back, catching himself against a tree trunk. On the ground before him, sitting in a pile of scattered baskets and spilled luminous berries, was the most unusual creature he had ever seen. She was tiny, barely reaching his chest if she stood, with pale lavender skin that shimmered faintly at the edges like mother of pearl. Her eyes, wide with shock, were the deep amber color of aged whiskey, too large for her delicate face, framed by silver lashes. She wore flowing robes of woven moonlight thread, and her hair, which tumbled past her waist, was the silver white of starlight. She stared at him. He stared at her. A beat of absolute silence held the world in place. Then she whispered something in a language that tickled the back of his translator implant, which struggled for a full 3 seconds before rendering, "You are not from the eastern villages." "No," Ethan managed. "I'm not." Her name was Issa. She told him this in careful, halting syllables after his translator calibrated itself to her dialect, a process that involved her saying increasingly longer sentences while he nodded with what he hoped looked like intelligence rather than awe. She was a berry gatherer, a lore-keeper's apprentice, and she explained with enormous solemnity, deeply unhappy about her spilled harvest. He spent the next hour helping her pick them up. It was the strangest hour of his life, crouched in the violet grass beside a lavender-skinned alien girl who kept stealing glances at him like he might vanish. Each time he caught her looking, a blush would rise in her cheeks, turning them a deeper, warmer violet. She had a way of touching the tips of her fingers together when she was nervous, a subtle gesture he caught himself watching for. "Will you return tomorrow?" she asked when her baskets were full again, standing at the fork in the path where they would part ways. Ethan knew every protocol. He knew the rules. He looked at her amber eyes and the hopeful, terrified expression in them, and said, yes. He would break 17 regulations over the weeks that followed. Not one of them would he regret. The second morning, Issa brought him food. It arrived wrapped in large iridescent leaves, small cakes made of something grain-like and sweet, and a clay pot of warm liquid that smelled of honey and cold starlight. She set it before him with a gravity that suggested ceremony, watching his face with intense focus as he tasted it. "Is it good?" she asked. On Valoris, sharing first food is significant. It means you trust someone with your vulnerability. You cannot share first food with an enemy. Ethan chewed slowly, considering. "It's the best thing I've eaten since leaving Earth." He meant it. The blush crept up her neck again. She was different from what he expected, not fragile, though she looked it. Issa had opinions. She argued passionately about the best route through the forest, debated the metaphysics of her people's twin moon mythology with confident authority, and laughed, when something amused her, with a sudden, unself-conscious brightness that lit her entire face. The laugh surprised him every time. It came without warning and sounded like silver bells dropped on warm stone. She showed him her world in careful installments. The communal gardens where her people grew food collectively, each family tending a shared patch rather than individual plots, a practice she explained was rooted in a famine 3 generations back. The speaking stones, ancient granite pillars carved with the accumulated wisdom of Valorian elders, which her people visited when facing major decisions. The game she loved, something like chess but played with carved bone pieces on a circular board, governed by rules that seemed impossible until suddenly, around the 3rd session, they clicked into sense. "You learn quickly," she said, watching him study the board. She was sitting very close to him. Closer than the session before. He noticed. He didn't move away. "I have a good teacher," he said. She touched the tips of her fingers together. He had come to understand that meant she was wrestling with something she wanted to say. He waited. "On my world," she said carefully, "there is a saying. The one who teaches you to see is the one whose eyes you'll miss most when they're gone. It is said between people who have become important to each other." Ethan set down his bone game piece. The evening air was warm between them, thick with the perfume of night-blooming flowers. "Issa." "Yes. I think I am in considerable trouble." She looked at him, eyes wide. "Trouble? What kind?" "The kind," he said slowly, "where I don't want to go home." The silence after that was the softest, most charged silence he had ever sat inside. Then, very quietly, she moved her game piece, the wrong move, deliberately, and gave him a look of pure, terrified mischief. "Then don't go home tonight," she said. "Play one more game." He stayed until the second moon rose. He would have stayed until it set again. It was on the 14th day that Ethan realized he was in love with her. The realization landed not dramatically but quietly, the way a truth arrives when you've been circling it long enough. He was watching her stand at the edge of the silver river that ran behind the lorekeeper's house, her robe hitched at the knees, her bare feet in the water, her head tipped back to catch the early afternoon light. She was reciting something, a memorization exercise her mentor had set her, and the words tumbled out in musical Valorian cadences while she balanced on a smooth river stone with her arms out, perfectly easy, perfectly herself. He thought, "I want to know every word she has ever memorized. I want to know her grandmother's name. I want to see her laugh again before I leave this planet." He thought, "I don't want to leave this planet." That evening, she took him somewhere new, a high meadow above the tree line where the twin moons could be watched rising in sequence. They lay on their backs in the silver grass, shoulders almost touching, watching the rose moon climb first and then the silver one, and Issa told him the mythology of the paired moons, two sisters, separated by a jealous god, doomed to follow each other across the sky forever, close but never quite touching. "That's sad," Ethan said. "My people do not think so. They say it is not sad to follow someone you love. The following is its own kind of being together." He turned his head. She was already looking at him, which meant she had been looking at him for some time while he stared at the sky. Her eyes in the moonlight were luminous, the amber deep and warm. "Issa." "Ethan." His name in her mouth still sounded like something she was tasting carefully, turning over, deciding she liked. He sat up, and she sat up, and they were very close, close enough that he could see the faint luminescence along the line of her jaw, the way her silver lashes caught the moonlight. Close enough that her warmth reached him through the night air. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Yes." Her fingers touched together, then stilled. She had stopped hiding that gesture from him. It felt like a gift. "In 14 days, he said, "you have become the most important thing that has happened to me in years. Maybe ever." He watched her face. "I know I'm not from here. I know this is complicated. But I can't pretend I don't." "I know," she whispered. "I know you can't. I can't pretend either." She reached out and touched his face, the first time she had touched him directly, her fingers light and warm against his jaw. Her hand was smaller than his by half. He held very still, afraid that any movement might break whatever thread held this moment suspended. "You are the first human I have ever met," she said softly. "And you have ruined me for finding anything ordinary wonderful again." He turned his face slightly into her palm. "Is that a good thing?" "It is a terrifying thing," she admitted. "It is also the best thing." She was trembling slightly, he realized, not from cold. "Hold still," she murmured, and she leaned up and pressed her lips, soft and brief and brave, against his cheek. The twin moons moved in their ancient arcs overhead. Below them, Ethan brought his hand up to cover hers against his face, and held it there. There is a particular quality to the hours before an admission, a trembling in the air, a heightened awareness of small things. Ethan had experienced it before difficult mission briefings, before honest conversations he had put off too long. He felt it now, acutely, as they sat beside the lore-keeper's fire on the 21st evening, the warmth making the shadows dance, Issa quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet. She had been different all day. Not distant, more present, if anything. Her eyes finding him more often. A new tension in the set of her shoulders. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing is wrong." She stared into the fire. "I am trying to find courage." "For what?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Then, when I was a child, the lore-keeper told me that the bravest thing a Valorian can do is speak a true thing out loud. That the universe acknowledges courage." She finally looked at him. "I want the universe to acknowledge me tonight." Ethan waited. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the forest, night birds called to each other. "I have had warmth for people before," Issa said. "Care. Even what my people call the growing feeling, like something in your chest expanding when someone enters a room. I have had that." She paused. "But what I feel for you is different." "It is." She touched her fingers together, then consciously unfolded her hands and placed them flat on her knees. "It is the kind of feeling that changes the shape of the world. Where you are becomes the center of the map, and everything else is just the edges." Ethan's chest was very tight. "I know you have to go eventually," she continued. Her voice was steady, which he suspected cost her something. "I know your world is not my world. I know this is not how your people usually." She stopped. Started again. "I only want to say it once, honestly, because the lore-keeper says a feeling kept inside is a feeling that festers. You are my..." She switched briefly into Valorian, then caught herself, then squared her shoulders and translated, "You are my first human lover. The first being from beyond the stars who has touched my heart. And I do not regret a single moment of knowing you." The word lover, translated, carried the Valorian connotation, not merely romantic, but something deeper, the one who occupies the intimate country of the heart. Someone trusted with the places you hide from the world. Ethan sat stunned for a full, held breath. Not by the love, he had seen that building, had felt it building in himself, but by the courage of her. By the absolute, clear-eyed bravery of a woman choosing honesty over safety. He reached across and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his immediately, tightly. "Issa," he said, "I came to this planet to study a civilization." He looked at her, at the firelight in her amber eyes, at the slight trembling of her lower lip. "I think instead I found the reason I was ever launched into space at all." The sound she made was small and involuntary, a soft, broken exhale. Then she was leaning into him, her head against his shoulder, her fingers still laced with his, and he wrapped his arm around her and held her the way you hold something you are afraid to lose. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire, while the twin moons tracked their ancient paths overhead, the rose one following the silver, close but never quite touching, telling their old story of love that survives distance. On the 28th day, Ethan sent his first falsified report. He told Mission Control that a peculiarity in the planet's atmospheric readings required an additional survey period. He requested 14 more days. The request was approved with minimal scrutiny. He had a perfect record, and 14 days was nothing against the scope of a full survey mission. Issa found out what he had done because he told her. He had decided, somewhere in the past weeks, that there was no part of himself he wanted to keep from her. "You lied to your command," she said, eyes wide. "Yes. For me. For 14 more days. Yes." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "The lore-keeper will be angry if I miss my morning lessons." A pause. "I have decided I don't care." They spent those 14 days differently from the first 28, with the specific, intentional tenderness of people who are counting their hours. She took him to the high meadow again, and this time he brought her something from his ship, a small portable projector that cast the stars of his home system onto the grass around them. She walked through the projected constellations with her arms out, turning slowly, looking up, while he watched her and memorized the image for the years of space travel that lay ahead. "Show me Earth's star," she said. He pointed. She found it, walked to it, stood inside the projected light of soul, and looked at him. When you are home, she said, and you look up at your sky, I will be here, looking up at mine. And we will both be looking at stars. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard, he said, or the saddest. Both things can be true. On the last night, she brought him to the Silver River. The night was warm, the twin moons full, both of them, for once, in the same quadrant of sky, as close to each other as they ever came. The river ran silver-black and warm, and Issa stood at its edge and let her robe slip from her shoulders with a quiet deliberateness that stole the breath from his lungs. My people, she said softly, have a ceremony for parting. We call it the last warmth giving. It means, she met his eyes, that you give someone a memory of your warmth to carry with them into the cold. He crossed the distance between them without a word. She was small in his arms and she fit there perfectly, her luminescent skin warm against his, her face tipped up to his. He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in, jasmine and starlight and something that was simply, distinctly her, and she made a soft sound against his mouth when he finally kissed her. Later, they lay together in the silver grass beside the river, his arm around her, her head on his chest, listening to the water and the night birds and each other's breathing slow. She drew patterns on his forearm with one careful fingertip, tracing constellations, he realized after a while. She was mapping the stars of his home onto his skin. I will not forget you, she said. Not with sadness. With the clean certainty of someone stating an immutable law. I know, he said. I won't forget you either. That's not something I'm capable of. Will you come back? He looked up at the twin moons, the rose one and the silver, following each other across the unchanging sky. Yes, he said. Not because protocol would allow it. Because some promises are simply facts, they exist before you speak them, and speaking them only acknowledges what was already true. She pressed her lips to his collarbone, just over his heart. Then I will keep a basket of first food waiting, she said. And I will teach you to win at the bone game. You are still dreadful at it. He laughed, a real laugh, startled out of him, and she laughed too, that silver bell sound, and the night held them both. In the morning, he walked back to his ship through the violet forest while the first moon was still setting, his chest aching with a fullness he had no name for in any language the translator knew. Behind him, on the edge of the tree line, a small figure stood and watched him go, not weeping, not waving, simply present. Bearing witness. The way you do when you want to hold a moment completely before it passes into memory. He did not look back, because he knew if he did he would not leave. He carried her with him into the dark between the stars. The warmth of her. The amber of her eyes. The sound of her laugh and the gravity of her silences and the way she had said, out loud, brave and clear, the thing she felt, because she believed the universe acknowledges courage. He thought she was right about that.